Yo guys, what's going on? My name is Chris. Welcome back to the channel. If this is your first time, welcome to the channel. Today, we are going to talk about what's going on with Russia and Ukraine. But not only what's happening on the border of Russia and Ukraine and why the tensions are so high, but the State Department urges U.S. citizens in Ukraine to leave the country amid the Russian buildup on the border. Today, we're going to take a look at this conflict. We're going to take a look at the history leading up to this conflict. We're going to talk about what Ukraine wants, what Russia wants, what it means to the U.S., and the parallels between the recently fumbled Afghanistan withdrawal. Now, today we're going to try something just a touch different. Before we get started, drop a comment below. Let me hear what you think or know what's going on in that area of the world, specifically between Russia and Ukraine. I want to hear what you guys think. Your feedback not only helps me, but helps everybody else with the community. So drop a comment right now what you think is going on. And if you don't know, cool, let us know, because that helps me understand what you guys want to know. And I'm here to give that to you. Speaking of giving it to you, I want you to give to me a like on this video and subscribe. Let's get into the show. The US and UK have been warned by Russia that they would pay heavy price if they invade Ukraine. Okay? Russia has openly said that not only the US, but Ukraine and the UK, they could pay a heavy price, quote unquote, if Russia invades Ukraine. That's a threat, everybody. Tensions between Russia and the West are the worst they've been since the Cold War. Currently, more than 100,000 Russian troops are stationed at various points along the border with Ukraine, which Ukraine, if you didn't know, was a Russian state at one time and for a while. President Vladimir Putin and his officials insist they are just carrying out military exercises, but fear of an invasion have been mounting since last year when American satellite imagery showed Russia sending more equipment and personnel to the border. Being a military guy, military exercises is a very tactful way of saying we're not going to tell you what we really want to do. Military accidents are usually big mistakes. So are exercises. Let's just talk about Vladimir Putin for a second. We're just going to sidetrack for a second, okay? Vladimir Putin, here are some highlights of Vladimir Putin, okay? He came to power around 2000 in Russia post the USSR collapse, which was about a decade prior to that. Vladimir Putin is one of the richest people living, which no one seems to know because you can't actually find out how much he's worth. Estimates are between $70 and $200 billion by Forbes magazine, okay? Let's just put it in perspective. Former President Trump was worth $3 billion. Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, Warren Buffett, that's the type of wealth we're talking about. And when you have that type of wealth and you have that type of power, you have a lot of leverage. He served for the KGB, generally speaking, as the Russian mafia. He's also a black belt in judo, which means not only is he a badass as a leader of a country, but he can also kick your ass and mine. And he's 70, and I would take the beating. He's just an all-around badass, and the world recognizes that, especially with his country behind him. So the question is, what's the history between Russia and Ukraine? Well, Ukraine was part of the Russian Empire for centuries before it came a part of the USSR. When the Soviet Union dissolved with the end of the Cold War in 1991, USSR falling apart, Ukraine became independent. Although their shared history means the two are still very culturally linked, Ukraine has sought to distance itself from Russia in recent years and instead look to the West for support. So, the next question would be, where are the troops stationed? Where are these Russian troops stationed? Currently, there's 100,000 Russian troops stationed at various points along the 1,200-mile border with Ukraine. That means there's troops along the entire border. Last week, U.S. intelligence officials claimed that Russia is planning to deploy as many as 175,000 more troops in preparation for a potential invasion that could happen early this year. Side note, I was in Iraq when Russia invaded Georgia, another solvent state of Russia, kind of like Ukraine, like was part of Russia at one point, but then became independent potentially around the same time Ukraine did. And the Georgians staged in Iraq because they were our ally and they were scared shitless. So I'm familiar with this firsthand of what Russia does and how hard they flex. So here's the next question. What does Russia want? What does Vladimir Putin want? After rising to power in 2000, Vladimir Putin has sought to maintain the Russian sphere of influence over its two neighbors and former Soviet states of Ukraine and Belarus. Sphere of influence, huh? That's a very fancy way of saying you do what we say or we will destroy you. Very common amongst that part of the world. Any attack on either state has seen by the president as a direct attack on Russian sovereignty. He is also fearful of Western involvement in either resulting in a new democracy being established on the doorstep of Russia, not communism, democracy, which has been increasingly autocratic during his rule, communism. As such, Russia has issued a list of demands that would reduce Western influence in the region. It includes a guarantee that Ukraine would never become a member of NATO, that the two end their security alliance, and that the number of NATO troops in Eastern Europe are reduced. Sounds like a military ploy to me. What does Ukraine want, right? What does Ukraine want? Not much, actually. Ukraine insists that Moscow can't control whether it moves closer towards being a member of NATO or with other Western allies. All Ukraine wants is to do what Ukraine wants to do. And they want to become a part of NATO and have more Western allies. Russia is saying, no, we don't want that. How is that another country's decision? That's the big question. That's like us telling Mexico, no, you can't do what you want to do in your country because we're your neighbor. Doesn't really make any sense to me. How could it affect relations in the West? A full-fledged conflict between Russia and Ukraine would have extreme consequences for international relations. It would deepen hostilities between Moscow, the US, the UK, NATO, and other Western members. How will this affect America? Well, that's the big question, and that's what's most important to us because we're Americans, right? Well, let's look at it this way. And I might mess up the name of this Air Force base, but we utilize an airfield on the Polva Air Base. I might be saying it wrong. The Polva Air Base is 5 miles away from Russia, or 8 kilometers. We, Americans, and the West, NATO, use that Air Force base to move our troops and supplies in and out of the closest strategic military base to Russia, the Eastern Front. So, does that sound familiar? Several months ago, I shot a show on the conflict that was going on in Afghanistan when China said to the Americans, get out of Kabul, because Kabul Air Force Base was the most eastern Air Force base next to China that Americans used. Russia is telling Americans to get out because we use Polva Air Force Base 5 miles from the border. This is typical military chess. Moving pawns and taking ground. Moving pawns and taking ground. This is how conflicts start. Positioning. Air Force bases are very important. Our recommendation to the U.S. citizens currently in Ukraine is that they should consider departing now using commercial or privately available transportation options, the senior State Department official said Sunday evening on a call with reporters. Okay, so let's just take a look at this quickly, okay? The same situation, give or take, when it comes to American citizens in a potential conflict or current conflict is happening, which just happened in this new administration's rule, if you will, the Biden administration. And they're literally trying to do it the same way. And the entire world watched as we fumbled the Afghanistan withdrawal and American citizens were left behind. The State Department is telling American citizens to get out on their own. They're not taking them out on military flights or charter flights. I don't see this going very well. I see American lives being lost again. I really don't. And fundamentally speaking, when you don't have leadership at the top of a country, and it's not just Joe, it's his cabinet. However, he's responsible. He is not a leader. He is not a military man. And I see big problems happening, not only for the citizens of Ukraine, which is what's most important, but how about the thousands of Americans that are in Ukraine right now and have to get out on their own in a potential war zone that's about to happen. Living in a war zone for many years, it's not easy to move around. It's not easy to get flights, especially when you're not a citizen of the country. Unfortunately, this is happening. Unfortunately, Vladimir Putin will likely flex as he normally does. And when he says he's going to do something and he threatens, if you recall from the beginning of the show, the opening statement is the US, the UK have been warned by Russia that they will, quote, pay a heavy price if Russia invades Ukraine. So, guys, that is my thought process and the facts that are on this conflict currently. I don't see it going well for Americans. I don't see it going well for Ukraine. I hope that I am wrong. I really, really do. I hope that I am wrong. I want to know what you think. All right, guys, I hope you got something from this show. It opened my eyes big when I was researching everything. I didn't know the strategic position of the airfield and base and how close it was to Russia. However, listen, a zebra doesn't lose its stripes, and where there's smoke, there's fire. And this is the same situation in Afghanistan fundamentally when it comes to military positioning. If you learned anything from this show or want to teach me something that I did not articulate and that would be good to add into another show, guys, drop a comment below. Let's talk about it. We'll talk about it like adults. We're building a community. We're getting a lot of comments on these videos, and I appreciate you guys adding to the conversation. It not only helps me, but it helps you and it helps everybody else. So drop a comment. Let me know what you think. Smash that like button. Tell YouTube to get this out to others. And subscribe. I'll catch you next time.